The cold was already trying to kill her when the train doors slammed shut. Mara Quinn stood frozen on the platform as the engine hissed, coughed, and then pulled away, its iron wheels screaming against the rails. The sound faded into the mountains, leaving behind a silence so sharp it felt like pressure in her ears. Snow dusted the hem of her coat. The wind came down from the Bitterroot Range and went straight through wool, bone, and thought. She hadn't meant to miss it. But the man who was supposed to meet her never came. And the train did not wait for women who hesitated. Mara turned once, searching the narrow platform. A few crates, a leaning lamppost.
The station.
Building with its windows dark and boarded on one side. No aunt, no familiar face. Just Bitterroot Valley stretching out in pale blue dusk, wide and empty, as if it had already decided she didn't belong. Her fingers tightened around the strap of her valise. She could still feel the warmth of the train inside her coat. It faded fast. Ma. A.M. The station master stood in the doorway, hat pulled low, breath white. He looked at her the way men did when they were already finished caring. "You waiting on someone?" he asked. "Yes," Mara said. The word too quick, too hopeful. "My Aunt Agnes Quinn." The man's face shifted. Not surprise, recognition. He glanced down at the ledger in his hands. "That's so, yes, she wrote me." Mara reached into her coat, pulled out the folded letter, edges soft from being read too many times. She said, "She'd be here." The station master didn't take it. Cleared his throat, Mrs. Quinn married again last spring. Took off West San Francisco, last I heard. The words didn't land all at once. They came apart slowly, like boards loosening from a burned house. She knew I was coming, Mara said. The man shrugged. "Plenty of folks know plenty of things." He stepped aside. "You'll need to clear the platform. Last stop tonight." And then he closed the door. I clicked. Mara stood there a moment longer, as if the world might correct itself if she stayed still enough it didn't The wind shoved her from behind, impatient. She picked up her valise and walked. The town of Bitterroot was smaller than the map suggested. Single main road, a general store with one window lit, saloon already loud with men who had nowhere else to go. She passed them without looking up. She'd learned early that looking invited conversation, and conversation invited judgment. Her boots slipped once on the packed snow. She caught herself on a fence rail, breath hitching. Cold had crept into her lungs now. Each breath burned. She had nowhere to sleep. By the time she reached the edge of town, the light was nearly gone. She found the stable by accident, a sagging structure half collapsed against a stand of cottonwoods. One door hung loose, the other had been torn away entirely. Inside, it smelled of old hay and animals long gone. Would have to do. She dragged a few boards together to block the wind, stuffed hay into the worst of the gaps, and sat down hard against the wall. Her hands shook too badly to undo the buttons of her coat at first. When she finally did, she curled into herself, pulling her knees up, pressing her forehead into the wool. This wasn't how it was supposed to happen. She'd pictured this place. A kitchen with steam on the windows. A bed that belonged to her. A voice calling her name like it meant something. Instead, there was only the wind and the ache of being unwanted again. Mara reached into her pocket and pulled out the letter. She read it one last time by the weak lantern light she'd salvaged from the stable wall. "Come west, Mara. There's room here. We look after our own." She folded it carefully. Then she tore it in half. The sound was small, final. She tucked the pieces beneath a loose board and lay down, her cheek pressed to cold earth. The wind moaned through the trees like it was searching for something it had lost. Mara slept badly. She dreamed of doors closing, of hands letting go. When she woke, the sky was still dark, but the cold had sharpened. We're stiff, panic rose fast and ugly in her chest. She sat up too quickly, and the world tilted. She would freeze if she stayed. She stood, stamping her feet, breath coming in ragged pulls. That was when she noticed the light. A lantern, just beyond the open door, and a man standing beside it. He was tall, wrapped in a heavy coat, hat pulled low. He didn't step closer, didn't speak at first. He just stood there, watching her like one might watch a skittish animal, careful not to spook it. Mara's hand went to the small knife in her boot. She didn't pull it. She didn't trust herself to. "What do you want?" she asked. His voice came low and even. "You planning on dying out here, or just hoping someone else?" Notice the question landed harder than any accusation. "I didn't ask for help," Mara said. "No," he agreed. "You didn't tea?" He lifted the lantern slightly, light cutting across the stable wall. The makeshift barricade, the thin blanket she'd wrapped around herself. His eyes were sharp, but not unkind, tired. Like they'd seen too many winters already. "Nights get mean," he said, "especially to folks who don't belong to anyone." The words struck something deep and sore. "I belong to myself," Mara said. He nodded once. "That'll have to be enough then," he said. The lantern down just inside the doorway and stepped back. "Name's Jed Rains," he said. "I live over the ridge. You need firewood. There's some stacked by the creek. If you're still here come morning, town might notice, might not." "Why are you helping me?" Mara asked. Jed paused, hand on the stable post.
Ice.
"Because someone should have helped before it got this cold," he said.
Out.
Then he turned and disappeared into the dark. Mara stood there a long time, staring at the lantern's steady glow. No one had ever left her light without asking something in return. She picked it up with careful hands. Outside, the wind eased, just a little. She didn't know yet that Bitterroot would test her, that the town would whisper, that staying would cost more than leaving ever had. All she knew was this: the night hadn't taken her, not yet. And for the first time since the train pulled away, Mara Quinn stopped waiting for someone to come get her. The lantern burned low by morning, casting a tired yellow eye across the dirt floor of the stable. Mara woke stiff and sore, with hay stuck in her hair and a line of cold up her back where the blanket had slipped. Her stomach ached from hunger, but she didn't move right away. She listened. No wind. No boots in the snow. No voice telling her to go. She was still here. So was the firewood, just as the man named Jed Rains had said. A neat stack by the creek, dry and clean-cut. She'd carried as much as she could the night before, limbs shaking, teeth chattering. But she'd survived. By midday, the town began to stir. Wagons rattled over hard-packed snow, doors opened. People emerged, bundled in coats and suspicion. She kept her head down and walked to the general store. Inside, the warmth hit her first, then the smell. Beans, leather, tobacco, pine. The storekeeper, wiry man with sharp eyes, watched her take each step like she was counting stolen minutes. "You looking for something?" Mara hesitated. "Soap." His eyes narrowed. "She got coin?" She didn't. He reached behind the counter and set down a small bar anyway. "Missy, who runs the boarding house, needs help with wash. Go ask her. She vouches for you. You pay me Friday." Mara nodded, took the soap with two hands like it might vanish. That was how it started. She scrubbed floors at the boarding house, peeled potatoes in the kitchen, mended shirts until her fingers cracked. She said little, answered only when asked. Her nights were spent back in the stable, where she hung rags to block the wind and lined her coat with straw. The townspeople talked. She heard them in line at the well, outside the saloon. Behind her back in church, stray from the east, no people, no papers.
Ow!
Pretty girl like that doesn't land alone without a story. She said nothing. Let it pass through her like smoke. But some nights, it burned low in her chest until sleep wouldn't come. She saw Jed again 3 days later. He didn't say much, just handed her a tin of coffee and said, "It's not a gift. I had extra." Then he walked off. The next day, she returned the tin, cleaned and wrapped in cloth. Toma Tulks showed up not long after, knocked once on the stable wall while she was sweeping out straw. Mara. She nodded. He offered her a set of broken tools. "Fix these. You can keep one." She didn't know what to make of him at first. He had quiet eyes, skin weathered like bark, and moved like he already knew the shape of every step before he took it. He didn't speak unless it mattered. So when he said, "You're still here," it meant something. They worked on the broken-handled hammer, and a rusted chisel. He showed her how to wrap the wood, how to oil the blade, how to wait before striking. By the end of the week, she had her own hammer. Toma took the rest and said nothing else. He didn't need to. Jed stopped by once more, dropping off nails and kindling without a word. She rebuilt the stable door that afternoon, and for a little while, the town felt like it might allow her to exist. Then came the letter. It arrived in the boarding house kitchen, folded neat in an envelope that smelled faintly of perfume and old guilt. Mara recognized the handwriting. Immediately, Agnes Quinn. "My dear Mara," it began, "I do hope you understand. The household is too full now. The children need space. You'd only be a burden, truly." There was more, so much more. Lines about prayer, timing, and how Mara would find her place in God's season. She read it once, then again, and then she felt at the ache she thought she'd buried back in Chicago, the one that whispered, "They were right about you." Her hands curled into fists. The paper crumpled, while she walked out into the yard behind the boarding house and found an old kettle on a stump. Inside, ashes from the morning fire still smoldered. She fed the letter to them 1 page at a time. The flame caught fast. Curling edges. Dark smoke, a brief twist of heat. She didn't flinch. Behind her, someone cleared their throat. She turned to see Toma standing near the fence, arms folded. "She your blood?" he asked. Mara didn't answer. "Blood means less than most think." He said, "Sometimes the land holds you better than family." Mara met his gaze. "I don't know if this place wants me either." He shrugged once. "It hasn't spit you out yet." The words stayed with her all night. The next morning, Jed was waiting outside the stable. He wasn't looking at her, just staring out at the hills, hands in his coat pockets. Hat pulled low. "You should eat with us tonight," he said finally. "Me and Toma, we cook enough anyway." Mara hesitated. "I won't ask again," Jed said, "so don't say yes unless you mean it." She almost didn't but something softened inside her. The part that remembered what warmth felt, like real warmth, not just fire. She nodded. The cabin was a mile out, tucked against the ridge, half buried in snow. Smoke rose from the chimney. Inside, it smelled like rabbit stew and tobacco and old wood. They didn't ask her questions, didn't pry. Just passed the bread, poured the broth. Listened when she spoke and didn't flinch when she didn't. At the end of the meal, Toma placed a small carved figure on the table, a bird with its wings half open. "It's not done," he said, "but it doesn't have to be." Mara reached out, touched it gently. No one had ever handed her something unfinished without expecting her to fix it. They sat in silence for a long time after that. When she left, the cold didn't bite so hard. Back in the stable, she swept the floor clean, hung the blanket tighter, and lay down without curling into herself. Tomorrow, she would look for more work. Maybe help the baker. Maybe learn to ride. Maybe God help her try smiling back when someone nodded first. "But tonight," she whispered to the rafters, "if no one's coming for me, then maybe I stop waiting." The stable smelled different now, less like rot and abandonment, more like pine and warm tools. The new door didn't creak anymore. The gaps were sealed tight. When Mara opened it each morning, light spilled in across the swept floor and the folded blanket that served as her bed. She still lived here. She still wasn't sure for how long. But for the first time since stepping off that train, she woke without dread in her chest. Her mornings had rhythm now. Sweep the floor. Heat, water, scrub clothes, men's shirts at the boarding house, return in time to help Toma in his shed out by the river. Sometimes Jed joined them. Sometimes he didn't. He was like the weather showing up only when he had something worth bringing. This morning, he brought a split rail. "Figured you could use practice," he said, handing her the cracked wood. Mara held it steady as he showed her how to brace the nail, angle the hammer.
"Ow."
The blow rang through her fingers. The second one sat cleaner. "Not bad," Jed said. She caught him watching her hands, the fresh scrapes, the calluses starting to form. "You miss it?" she asked. "Miss what?" "The war. Being needed even if it was for something awful." Jed looked down, thumbed. "At the grain in the wood, no. I miss knowing what to do." Mara said nothing. She knew exactly what he meant. That afternoon, Toma showed her how to sharpen a blade. He handed her a drac knife that had belonged to his grandfather, the steel pitted with age. "It cuts better when it remembers who held it last," he said. Mara didn't ask what that meant, but her hands were steady as she ran the whetstone over the edge. They worked in silence for a while, the river nearby murmuring like a secret. Then Toma spoke. "You dream about where you came from, sometimes," she said. "You run from it?" She looked up at him. "Aren't we all running from something?" Toma nodded. "Slow, sure. Question is, do you stop?" That night, Mara sat on the steps of the stable, coat around her shoulders, a tin cup of warm broth in her hands. The town was quiet. The mountains behind it loomed like old gods watching. Without judgment, it almost felt peaceful, till she heard the voices. Two men, drunk, from the saloon. They didn't see her at first. She stayed in the shadows, heart picking up. Then one of them, tall, thick-necked, red-faced, pointed toward the stable that the girl, the one shacked up alone. His friend snorted. "Reckon she's not alone that often." They both laughed. The sound cracked the quiet like a whip. Mara stood slowly, fists clenched. They walked on, staggering toward the road, never noticing her. Still the shame settled like ash over her shoulders. She didn't sleep. The next day, she walked into town with her chin higher than usual. People stared. She didn't look down. At the general store, she caught a woman whispering to another near the flour sacks. Maybe she likes the attention. Mara dropped her coin louder than necessary on the counter. By mid-morning, she'd made up her mind. She was done hiding. She found Jed out near his shed, cutting firewood. "Teach me to shoot," she said. He stopped, axe mid-swing. Looked at her like he was reading more than her words. "I will," he said. "But not because you're scared." "I'm not," she lied. We nodded. "Tomorrow morning early." The rest of the day passed in a blur. She mended. She scrubbed. She ignored the looks. That night, Toma handed her a small leather pouch. Inside, a small knife, barely longer than her hand. "It's not a gift," he said. "It's insurance." Mara held it like it might disappear. "Why are you both helping me?" Toma didn't smile. "Because someone should have." Before it got this hard, she nodded. Ish couldn't say thank you. The words wouldn't come. The next morning, just as the frost began to melt from the stable roof, she met Jed in the clearing behind his cabin. He handed her a rifle. Showed her how to hold it. Breathe, squeeze not, jerk the trigger. Her shoulder ached by the third shot. By the sixth, she hit the target. By the 10th, she exhaled differently, steadier, heavier. Jed said nothing. But he looked at her like he saw something he hadn't expected. Afterward, she sat on the porch while he chopped kindling. "You don't flinch," he said. "I've already been hit," she replied. He paused. "You always talk like that?" "Like what? Like you're waiting for someone to prove you wrong?" She shrugged. "So far." They havened tea. He didn't argue. Later that week, she passed the drunk man in the street, the one who'd laughed outside her stable. He looked at her like she was supposed to look away. She didn't He muttered something under his breath. But he didn't follow. Word got around after that, not all of it kind, but the whispering didn't sting like it used to. Maybe it was the knife in her boot. Maybe it was the rifle. Maybe it was the simple truth. She was still here.
Ow.
But one night, while sweeping out the stable, Mara heard two teenage boys outside giggling. One of them said, "Bet she's still got that whore's dress packed away." The other laughed. She gripped the broom so hard it cracked. She didn't run after them. She didn't cry. She walked inside, set the broom down, and sat on the floor. The letter from her aunt was long gone, but the words still lingered, like a bruise, unsuitable, burden, shame. She curled her knees in, pressing her forehead against them. Not because she believed them, because part of her still remembered how it felt too. The door creaked. "Bootsteps, Jed?" He didn't say anything. Just sat beside her. After a long silence, she whispered, "I should have stayed gone." Jed didn't look at her. He just said, "You'd be gone either way. But here, you get to decide what that means." She didn't respond. But she didn't curl in tighter either. Outside, the wind shifted. Snow began to fall again. Inside, the girl who had once waited for someone to come save her sat upright on a floor she'd swept herself. And in her chest, something cracked. Not from breaking, from refusing to. Snowmelt dripped from the eaves of the stable, soft and steady like a ticking clock. Winter was loosening its grip, but Bitterroot was slower to thaw than the land around it. Ice still clung to the roots of things. In town, suspicion lingered in the corners, and looks held too long. In conversations that stopped when Mara walked by, she no longer flinched. But that didn't mean she wasn't watching. Jed noticed it too. He said nothing, but the way he walked beside her down the main road shoulders squared. Hand near his coat told her he knew. So did the way Toma had started carving slower, setting aside his tools every time she arrived, like he was waiting for her to speak first. She didn't not yet. That morning, she helped the baker patch a crack in the side window. Mrs. Archer, gray-haired and sharp-tongued. Let her stay after for coffee. You're still talking, the old woman said bluntly. Mara stared into the chipped mug. You keep showing up anyway. That's good, Mara nodded. It doesn't mean they'll stop. No. Mara said that was the problem. Later that day, while carrying firewood from the store, she passed by the saloon. The door banged open behind her. She kept walking. Then the voice came too loud, too familiar. Well, if it ain't the orphan queen herself. Mara turned slowly. The man from before, red-faced, thick neck, bigger now without distance to dull the size of him. He stepped toward her. You ain't said hello yet? Seems rude. She didn't answer. She kept her grip on the firewood tight. What's the matter? He said. Too proud now? Thought girls like you liked the attention? He reached for her fast. She dropped the wood and shoved him back. Harder than she meant to. He stumbled, caught himself, and his face changed. The laughter left. Something meaner settled in. Mara backed away, heart pounding. Then a shadow moved between them. Jed, he didn't speak. Just stood there, square in front of the man, eyes locked. The drunk man laughed once. You gonna step in for her, huh? Jed still didn't speak. You sweet on her reins? Thought you didn't take in strays? Jed's hand dropped to his coat. The man froze. All right, he said, backing up with hands half raised. All right. But before he turned, he leaned in and hissed, She ain't worth the bullet. Jed didn't flinch. The man staggered off. Mara realized she'd stopped breathing. Jed turned around. You all right? She nodded. He looked at the dropped firewood, then back at her. You don't have to be. I'm fine. Jed raised an eyebrow. You're always fine. She hated how the words scraped inside. Later, at Thomas' shed, the three of them sat in quiet. Tomas smoked his pipe. Jed leaned against the work table. Mara turned the carving blade slowly in her fingers. He's not the only one, she said. Jed's jaw worked. He say anything else? No, but others will. Toma exhaled smoke. They already have. That hung in the air. Mara looked between them. Why are you both risking anything for me? Jed answered first. We not. Mara frowned. We're risking something with you, he said. There's a difference. Toma added. Town don't like change. But it respects people who don't scare easy. Mara didn't reply. Because she was scared. But she was also tired of being afraid. The next morning, she stepped out of the stable and walked into town with purpose. She helped Mrs. Archer again, picked up extra sewing from the preacher's wife, sat outside the church, and repaired a torn hem for a child too shy to meet her eyes. She saw people watching, but this time some nodded. One old man tipped his hat. It was approval, but it wasn't exile either. That night, she found Jed on the porch of his cabin, sharpening his knife. Was that smart? She asked. What? Getting between me and him? People already talk. They'll talk anyway. Mara sat beside him. I don't want to be the reason you lose standing here. You think I had much standing to begin with? She smiled just slightly. Toma says you used to be a preacher? Jed chuckled, low and dry. I did. What happened? He paused, blade catching firelight. I lost my temper once too often. Said things men in robes aren't supposed to say. Like what? Jed didn't look at her. Like maybe grace isn't a thing you get. Maybe it's something you give even when it hurts. Mara thought about that a long time. You think people can change? She asked. Jed nodded once. Only thing worth believing in. They sat a while longer, the night stretching out around them. The next few days passed quietly. No new threats. No new letters. But the silence had weight to it. Then, one late afternoon, Toma found her at the river. Storm's coming, he said. She glanced up at the clouds. Doesn't look like it. He shook his head. Not that kind. She frowned. He handed her a small cloth-wrapped bundle. Extra carving blades. You've earned them. Mara smiled. Thank you. But Toma's eyes didn't soften. Some of the men have been talking again, he said. She stiffened. About me? No, he said. About Jed. What about him? They don't like that he stood up for you. Don't like that he doesn't explain himself. Or you. A pause. You need to decide soon, Mara. Stay and make roots or run before they burn the soil. She clenched the bundle tighter in her hands. That night, she lay awake in the stable. The moon slid across the rafters like a watchful eye. She thought about her aunt's letters. About the boy in the street. The drunk at the saloon. About the way the town had stared then looked away. She thought about Jed and the rifle. Toma and the bird carving. Her own hands, stronger now. Her name said out loud without shame. She sat up, swung her legs over the side of the bed, and stared at the closed door. They could whisper. They could hate. But she wasn't going anywhere. She didn't run. She turned, faced the town square, and said, let them talk. The frost didn't come back. Not that week. Not the next. By mid-March, the ground had softened enough for the wild crocuses to push through, their purple heads trembling in the breeze like they were still unsure they belonged. Mara understood the feeling, but she stayed. And the town noticed. She helped Toma rebuild the benches outside the churchyard. The preacher didn't speak much, but he nodded when she offered to sand them herself. She began baking in the early mornings at Mrs. Archer's, then walked deliveries through town by noon. She spoke more, looked people in the eye. She even laughed once openly when a child dropped a biscuit and blamed it on ghost hands. It wasn't that they stopped talking. They didn't but the sharpness dulled. Suspicion turned to curiosity. A few folks asked her name again, even though they knew it. One old rancher tipped his hat and called her Miss Quinn. She didn't correct him. It sounded better now, less like a mistake. Still, something tugged at the edges of her peace. It arrived one afternoon with a dusted envelope and a San Francisco postmark. Mrs. Archer handed it over with a long look, but said nothing. Mara took it to the stable. She sat on the crate by the window, the same place she'd mended her first shirts in town, and stared at the neat cursive handwriting across the front. Agnes. She hadn't written since the last letter Mara burned. Her hands didn't shake when she opened it. Not at first. My dear Mara, it began. It seems you've found some kind of life there, though I can't imagine what sort. I hope you've reconsidered the offer. San Francisco is thriving, and there is still space for you in the household, if you're willing to. Mara stopped reading. The rest of the words bled together into a familiar tone. Guilt dressed up in propriety. A second-hand kind of love. Still space for you like she was furniture. She folded the letter back. Slow, precise. Later that evening, she sat outside Jed's cabin. He brought her coffee and didn't ask why she looked tired. She told him anyway. She wants me back. Jed didn't flinch. You want to go? I don't know. You do. Mara looked out at the trees. She talks like she's giving me something because she wants something back. I think she wants me to be the version she can explain. Jed leaned back in his chair. Some people only love what they understand. That's not love. No, he said, but it's comfortable. Most folks pick comfort over truth. Mara didn't speak. After a while, Jed nodded toward the hills. I ever tell you how I ended up here? She shook her head. I buried a wife, he said. And a baby. 2 winters apart, Mara looked over. I came west because I needed a place quiet enough to hear myself fall apart. Did it work? Not at first, he said. But it gave me space. In spaces, what grief needs most. Mara thought about the letter in her pocket. How even folded, it felt heavier than anything she'd carried all day. Do you ever think about leaving? Sometimes. But then I remember, I built something here. Not big, not loud, but mine. Mara stared into the fire. When she went back to the stable, she didn't sleep. She lit a small lantern, sat at the makeshift table, and laid out the letter again. This time, she read the entire thing. Agnes's handwriting dipped at the same place it always had. Her sentences curled, always avoiding the edges, like she was afraid of corners. There was a check folded inside. More than Mara had seen in months. In case you change your mind. She held it over the lantern flame for a long time. Then she set it down. Not because she was keeping it, but because she was done being reactive. She'd burned 1 letter already. That felt like running. This wasn't that. This was choosing. She would return it. With a reply. In her own words, the next day she spent hours carving her answer, 1 sentence at a time, like she was cutting it into wood. By evening, the letter was folded clean, sealed, and tucked into her coat pocket, ready for the next outbound mail. Toma found her sanding a broken chair outside the chapel. Looks like someone made a choice, he said. Mara gave a half smile. I figured it's time to stop hovering between 2 places. He grunted approval. I think I want to find a small place near the river, she added. Somewhere I don't have to borrow walls anymore. Toma nodded. You'll need help raising it, I'll ask. That night, Mara walked the ridge with Jed. The stars were starting to come out. The wind was low. No words passed between them for a while. Then he said, You walked different today. How so? Like you belonged to something. She looked over at him, unsure what to say. You've been surviving since you got here, he said. But now, you're doing something else. What? Living. They reached the overlook, where the land spilled wide beneath them tree lines. Barn roofs, the smoke of bitterroot curling into the dusk. I thought I needed someone to give me a place, Mara said. Jed's voice was quiet. You did. She turned to him. You gave it to yourself, he said. That's the part they don't tell you. They stood there a long time. When she went home, she slept deeper than she had in weeks. And in the morning, the first bitterroot bloom broke through the soil just outside her door. She knelt beside it, fingers brushing the pink petals. Toma had told her bitterroot only grew in the hardest ground, that it survived where others withered. It didn't look like much, but it was hers. That afternoon, she helped load the wagon with lumber. Her new home wouldn't be big, wouldn't be fancy, but it would be hers. She hammered the first nail with her own hand. The letter burned fast. She didn't watch it curl. She dropped it in the stove, then reached for the door. By late April, the cabin stood upright, trough-framed, notched at the joints, roofed in scavenged tin and pine shingles. It leaned a little to the east, but so did Mara on long days, so she figured they matched. It wasn't much, but it was standing. The stable, once her shelter, had gone quiet again. She'd swept it clean before leaving, folded the blanket one last time, and left it folded in the corner. A goodbye, but not a severing. That place had held her when nothing else had. Now, the new cabin sat at the edge of the cottonwoods, close enough to the river to hear it, but high enough not to flood. Toma said she'd chosen well. Jed said nothing, just built steady, one board after another, his hands always moving, always certain. They'd worked side by side for weeks. Toma handled the woodwork, Jed handled the roof, and Marwell, she did everything else. She hauled, hammered, swept, measured, climbed. Her hands bore fresh scars and sun-darkened lines. She didn't wear gloves much anymore. The feel of splinters didn't scare her like it used to. Neighbors had come by, some to help, some to watch. 1 or 2 just to see if it was really happening. She didn't care. Let them watch. Inside, it smelled of sawdust and sweat. She'd hung up to quilts, one on the window, one across the back wall. She'd built a shelf for her tin cup and kettle. A stool stood by the hearth, where the first fire crackled low on a cool morning in May. She woke early now, not because she had to, but because she wanted to. That was new. Each day, she started with a walk down to the river. Cold water on her face, birdsong in her ear, and the sky so wide it felt like it belonged to her too. She'd planted a few herbs in clay pots by the door. They hadn't sprouted yet, but the dirt was warm. It would happen. Jed brought over a table one morning. Old pine, smoothed down, a bit wobbly. He carried it with one arm like it weighed nothing. "You didn't have to," Mara said, brushing sawdust off her apron. He shrugged. "I didn't make it for anyone else." She helped him set it near the window. He lingered after. Not long, but enough. That night, Toma brought over a jar of blackberry preserves and didn't explain why. He never did. They sat out front, listening to frogs and the occasional coyote in the hills. "You remember when you first got here?" Toma asked. "I try not to," Mara said, but her smile gave her away. "You were quiet. Sharp around the edges. I was waiting for someone to tell me to leave." Toma looked at her. "And now? I'd like to see them try." He grinned. "You staying?" she asked. "Maybe," he said. "Or maybe I just like the porch." They both knew he wasn't talking about the porch. Later, alone, Mara sat by the window, legs curled up beneath her. The table caught the moonlight. Her shadow flickered on the far wall like it was dancing slow and steady to music only she could hear. She slept light that night, but not restless. The kind of sleep you earned. The days that followed were full. She helped with repairs at the chapel, traded bread for fabric, and began taking care of a neighbor's chickens when they traveled. Her name floated through town in ordinary sentences now. "Ask Mara. She knows how to fix that." "Mara helped me last week. You should see what Mara built." People didn't whisper anymore. They called. They waved. Some even smiled first. One afternoon, while cleaning out the shed, she found a faded blue ribbon tucked inside an old sewing box. Frayed at the ends, soft in the middle, probably once tied around a girl's braid. She kept it, not because it was hers, but because it reminded her of something that had been taken and something that could still be found again. That evening, Jed came by with 2 tin plates and stew. "I figured you hadn't eaten," he said. She hadn't tea. They sat out back beneath the stars, plates balanced on knees, silence between them, not awkward, just wide enough to feel honest. After a long moment, he asked, "You ever think you'd end up here?" Mara swallowed a mouthful. "The voice you selected does not support this language. Please click the upper right corner to switch to another voice. You regret it?" She looked out toward the dark line of the trees, the river just beyond. "No," she said. "I think I needed to come apart somewhere quiet." Jed nodded. "You came apart. And then?" She met his eyes. "I put myself back together." He didn't look away. "Better than before?" She hesitated. "Not better. Just mine." He smiled, then just slightly, and reached for her hand. She let him take it. No one said anything for a while. The night deepened. The frogs grew louder. The fire cracked. When he stood to leave, he didn't let go right away. "You're not waiting for someone to give you anything anymore, are you?" he asked. "No," she said, watching the stars. "I think I already have it." He squeezed her hand once, then walked into the dark, boots soft on the path. Mara sat there for a long time after, fingers warm from his touch, heart not racing but steady. Not desperate, but open. She wasn't in love. Not yet. But she could feel the ground softening. The next morning, she stepped outside and saw a fresh bloom near the edge of the path Bitorut. Wide open, pink as a promise. She knelt beside it, brushing a thumb over the petal. They were coming back. One by one. She looked up and saw the sun rising behind the ridge. For the first time in her life, she wasn't dreaming about a door opening. She was standing in the doorway looking out. "I didn't think anyone would ever want me here," she whispered. "You're here," he said. "That's the part that matters." Summer came to Bitterroot slow and soft, like someone easing into a room they weren't sure they were welcome in. The last frost passed without notice. One morning, the wind just didn't bite. The grass stayed green. The creek rose. And Maraquin woke to birdsong louder than the hammering of her own thoughts. Her cabin stood quiet and proud among the cottonwoods, no longer a thing she questioned or felt the need to apologize for. The roof didn't leak. The hearth drew strong. The herbs by the door had bloomed thin, reaching, persistent. Her name had been written on the mailbox out front, in Tama's careful hand. And when the neighbors' children came by, they didn't ask who lived there. They already knew. She spent her mornings baking or mending or walking down to the river with her sleeves rolled up and her mind quiet. In the afternoons, she helped Jed with the woodpile or joined Toma at the shed to carve spoons that no one needed but everyone liked to hold. Sundays had become her favorite. On Sundays, she cooked. It wasn't anything grand: rabbit stew, cornbread. The blackberry preserves Toma had given her back in spring, but it was enough. Jed brought the firewood. Toma brought stories from town and the occasional sarcastic complaint about a chicken that pecked him for no reason. They ate on the porch, bare feet on warm floorboards, the sun sliding down behind the trees like it had nowhere else to be. This Sunday was like that. A breeze moved through the pines. The smoke from the stove curled slow. Inside, Mara stirred a pot of stew with one hand and wiped her face with the back of the other. Her hair was pulled back, her sleeves smudged with flour, and her chest felt full in a way that had nothing to do with food. A knock sounded at the door, 2 quick taps, then a third, after a pause. It was Ruthie, the young girl from town, maybe 8 or 9, always trailing behind her older brothers like a shadow with a mind of its own. She held a small wildflower bouquet in one hand and a question in the other. "Miss Quinn," she said, "how come you live alone but you don't seem lonely?" Mara smiled, bent to meet her eye level. "That's a good question." Ruthie waited. "I used to think being alone and being lonely were the same thing," Mara said. "Then I found a place where I could belong to myself first. The rest came after." The girl frowned thoughtfully. "Did it hurt before?" Mara nodded. "It did, but not forever." Ruthie reached up and handed her the flowers. "Mama says you have brave eyes." Mara blinked, took the bouquet gently. "Tell your mama she's not wrong." When the girl ran back down the path, barefoot and free, Mara watched her until she disappeared past the tree line. Then she turned and placed the flowers in a jar on the windowsill, right beside the worn ribbon she still kept tucked there. By sundown, the table was full. Toma had brought a new carving. This one a small figure of a woman standing alone, chin lifted, arms at her sides. He didn't say who it was, but Mara knew. Jed poured coffee after the meal. No one said much. They didn't have to. There was a comfort in silence when it was shared. After the dishes were cleared and the porch swept, Jed lingered by the doorway. "You're different," he said. "So are you." He nodded. "That little girl today, Ruthie. She's watching you." Mara looked out at the path. "I know. You ready for that?" "I think I already am." She sat back down, the wood warm beneath her, the breeze soft. Her hand rested on the carved figure on the table. "You ever miss who you were?" Jed asked. Mara thought for a moment. "I miss the version of me who still believed someone else had to choose her," she said. "But I wouldn't trade places with her." He looked at her then, not like he was waiting for an answer, but like he already understood it. "You built something real here," he said. She nodded. "It didn't start that way, but it is now." They sat side by side as dusk crept in. The trees rustled with wind. Somewhere out in the dark, a night bird called. The world felt wide, but not empty. Full, but not crowded. Just enough. Mara closed her eyes for a moment. She saw the train platform. The snow. The old telegram. The first fire in the stable. The hands that reached for her without asking anything in return. The words whispered in the dark when she thought no one was listening. They said no one would want me. They were wrong. They were wrong because wanted had nothing to do with who stayed, and everything to do with what you chose to build when no one else handed you a blueprint. She had made something out of dust, out of silence, out of nothing. And now, when she looked around, she didn't see loss. She saw her life. The porch. The carved figure. The light in the windows. The stew pot still warm. The coffee cooling between two hands. She wasn't waiting anymore. She was home. She wasn't waiting anymore. She was home.